Hi, I have two children and I like to read them books. I grew up reading Mr. Men books and Grug books and all sorts of books. Being in my 40s, that was the era I came from. My kids have a lot of Mr. Men books, and my daughter chose this one to read the other night, and I was left rather disturbed, and I will tell you why. So, this is Mr. Tickle. Let's have a little read. So, it was a warm, sunny morning in his small house at the other side of the wood. Mr. Tickle was asleep. You didn't know that there was such a thing as a tickle, did you? Well, there is. Tickles are small and round and they have arms that stretch and stretch and stretch. Extraordinary long arms. Mr. Tickle was fast asleep. He was having a dream. It must have been a very funny dream because it made him laugh out loud and that woke him up. He sat up in bed, stretched his extraordinary long arms out, yawned an enormous yawn. Mr. Tickle felt hungry. So do you know what he did? He reached out one of his extraordinarily long arms, opened the bedroom door, reached down the stairs, opened the kitchen door, reached into the kitchen cupboard, opened the biscuit tin, took out a biscuit, brought it back upstairs, in through the bedroom door, and back up to Mr. Tickle in bed. As you can see, it is very useful indeed having arms as long as Mr. Tickle's. Mr. Tickle munched his biscuit. He looked out of the window. Today looks very much like a tickling day, he thought to himself. Now, this is where it starts to get a little creepy. So later that morning, after Mr. Tickle had made his bed and cooked his breakfast, he set off through the wood. As he walked along, he kept his eyes very wide open, looking for someone to tickle, looking for anybody to tickle. Sounding a little bit like a predator. Ooh! Eventually, Mr. Tickle came to a school. There was nobody about, so reaching his extraordinarily long arms up to a high window ledge, Mr. Tickle pulled himself up and peeped in through the open window. So now he's creeping around schools, looking for children. Inside, he could see a classroom. There were children sitting at their desks and a teacher writing on the blackboard. Mr. Tickle waited a minute and then he reached in through the window, uninvited, mind you. Mr. Tickle's extraordinary long arm went right up to the teacher, paused, and then tickled. The teacher jumped in the air and turned around very quickly to see who was there. But nobody was there. I would call that assault. Mr. Tickle grinned a mischievous grin. He waited another minute and then he tickled the teacher again. This time he kept on tickling until soon the teacher was laughing out loud and saying, "Stop it! Stop it!" over and over again. All the children were laughing too at such a funny sight. There was a terrible pandemonium. So the teacher asked him to stop, and Mr. Tickles ignored the teacher's request for him to stop, and all the children are laughing at the assault that's happening in front of their eyes. Eventually, Mr. Tickle thought that he'd had enough fun, so he gave the teacher one more tickle for luck, and then very quietly brought his arm back through the open window, chuckling to himself. He jumped down from the window, leaving the poor teacher to explain what it was all about, which of course he couldn't. Then Mr. Tickle went to town. So first he started his day by creeping through the woods. Then he found a children's school. He assaulted a teacher more than once. And now he's off down the street. Oh, and what a day Mr. Tickle had. He tickled the policeman on traffic duty at the crossroads in the middle of town. It caused an enormous jam. He tickled the greengrocer just as he was putting apples neatly in his shop window. The greengrocer fell over backwards and the apples rolled all over the shop. So Mr. Tickle's continuing to walk through town assaulting people. At the railway station, the guard was about to wave his flag for the train to leave. As he lifted his arm in the air, Mr. Tickle tickled him. And every time he tried to wave his flag, Mr. Tickle tickled him until the train was then minutes late, leaving the station, and all of the passengers were furious. So now he's assaulting people at the train station trying to do their jobs, making people late for work. That day, Mr. Tickle tickled everybody. He tickled the doctor, he tickled the butcher, he even tickled old Mr. Stamp the postman, who dropped all of his letters into a puddle. Then Mr. Tickle went home, sitting in his armchair in his small house at the other side of the wood. He laughed and laughed every time he thought about all the people that he had tickled/assaulted. Look, he's so proud. He's assaulted people all day. He's been to a primary school and he assaulted a teacher in front of the students. He's so pleased with himself. So, if you are in any way ticklish, beware of Mr. Tickle and those extraordinary long arms of his. Just think, perhaps he's somewhere about this very moment while you're reading this book. Perhaps that extraordinary long arm of his is already creeping up to the door of this room. Perhaps it's opening the door now and coming into the room. Perhaps before you know what is happening, you will be well and truly tickled, assaulted. So now the book ends with a threat that Mr. Tickle's going to come and assault you too.